Hey everyone, welcome to our presentation for SparkFX 2021, going over the making of Cassini Logs, a short film created in Unreal Engine. Cassini Logs is the competition winner of the Unreal Engine Real-Time Short Film Challenge, organized by Epic Games in collaboration with the Australian screen agencies. My name is Alex Popescu, and my main partner in this was Timothy Banco. I work in the visual effects industry as an environment supervisor, and Tim has extensive knowledge of Unreal Engine, having worked in virtual production and game cinematics. Before we dive into the process, we'd love to share the film with you, just in case you haven't seen it. If you did see Cassini Logs, then please just skip the next 5 to 6 minutes. Enjoy!
Please be careful down there. Especially you, 17. I'll be right behind you.
Let's start with talking a little bit about the challenge itself, the way it was organized in particular. The idea was to show that there is a lot of talent in Australia, and Epic Games, together with the screen agencies, invited Australian filmmakers to create short films up to 5 minutes, with the idea that the final output would be directly from Unreal Engine. There was no limitation in terms of the subject of the film or the way the film was going to be made, so there was amazing variety in terms of the output. There were up to 1,800 teams that applied to the competition, and 16 teams were selected for the first round of funding. The competition provided 2 weeks of training in order to get the people that weren't familiar with the engine, to give them the basics in terms of filmmaking in Unreal. In our case, we were lucky that we already had experience and we had already created and delivered projects in the engine. So even though the training was absolutely fantastic for the people that were just starting out, on our side, we felt like we're already in a good spot to make the film. After that process, we had about 4 weeks of development, at the end of which we had to pitch our idea. This was the time that we used to develop the script, try to polish the visual style, get the references, and get ready for pre-production. The time between the moment that we applied and the moment when we heard if we would be accepted into the program was about 6 weeks, and this is the time that we used for pre-production. Then once we received the funding, we used the following 6 weeks for actual film production. The 5-minute piece that we created is introducing the main character, Cassini, and also introducing the world that she lives in, together with parts of the plot. The whole idea was that we knew that choosing a sci-fi short film, we're not going to be able to answer all the questions that we're going to be raising, because in terms of design, in terms of our characters, in terms of our world, we decided to be quite complex. So we ended up pitching this really packed short film that had a couple of character moments, strong design language that would make the film immersive, and the film, just for a bit of a punch, would be finishing up with a short action scene. In order to make the film, the first step was obviously assembling the team. We were lucky to have an amazing network of friends and collaborators, people that we have worked with before, and we put together this awesome group of people that ended up delivering what now is Cassini Logs. Now, in order to pitch it, there were 3 main things that we focused on. Number 1, obviously, was the script, in order to give the competition organizers an idea of the kind of film we were going to be doing. Then the treatment was taking the script and adding the visual form to it. This is where we tried to answer a lot of the question in terms of how the film was going to look, how were we going to do it, what were the key themes that we were trying to touch on, what were our main references, so on and so forth. And then we put together a really quick teaser that was meant to show the world of the film. And we can have a look at that right now. This was it. Not long, just 1 minute long, but this was already showing the mood of the film that we're trying to make. So everything here has been done very quickly, focusing on the overall effect of the images. Now, what was the plan to make the film? It might seem obvious starting with let's make a full CG film, but at this point, there are lots of solutions in terms of either shooting on green screen or shooting on LED panels, in terms of getting actors involved. And that could have been absolutely fantastic to make, but we felt, given our experience and the really short time frame, we felt that keeping the film CG would be beneficial because it would allow us a bit more freedom in terms of what we can do and a consistent look. Everybody knows that compositing is actually quite complex, so if we would have shot our film on green screen, it would have been very tricky to integrate the frames. Same with in terms of setting up an LED shoot, that would have meant that all our content would have had to be finished by the time we do the film shoot, so that would have put even more pressure on a very tight production schedule. That's how we ended up going with the full CG film. Now, in terms of the approach, we split the whole project into development, pre-production, production, and post-production, just like a film shoot would. However, because of the limited time, this is where we adjusted a little bit how we approach each of these stages in order to make it work for us. In terms of one of the biggest advantages that we had was that because it's a full CG film, we could go from previs directly to final content in the engine, and that allowed us to have a very iterative process. So every stage wasn't throwaway work. We always kind of used let's say the mood that we set up for the previs, that was the base for our lighting, and the cameras that we set up for the previs was that was the base for the cinematography that was gonna come later on when we would have final animation. So we tried to keep the process very fluid and very iterative. And in the end, the 6 weeks that we had to finish the film in, that's where we decided to combine production and post-production. So a lot of the processes we did in parallel, from music to sound design to how we finish the shots while we're still figuring out the animation for them. So that was interesting. Now, in terms of collaboration, the key factor was the fact that we couldn't really be in the same room together. So obviously 2020 has been a difficult year on everybody, and the team for Cassini Logs, none of the artists have ever been in the same room. We've never actually spent time working on the film together. So in order to do that, we used three main things. The project was set up on cloud, so we used a combination of Google Drive and Amazon servers. We used Perforce for all the Unreal Engine collaboration, and then we used the Discord server for the day-to-day communication. Now, let's dive in and chat about the process a little bit more in detail. So you saw the teaser trailer that felt already quite polished, right? But that was actually really quick to do because we relied on a few key things. Number one, we knew that obviously our suit was not going to be finished. We were just designing it at the time. So we started by getting a suit model from a model library online, and that was going to be just the version of the suit that we decided to use for the previous. Then in terms of the environment, we used a lot of Megascans assets, and for the animation we used mocap libraries, a combination of some assets that we had, and then the Mixamo library was actually quite useful at the time because we found little snippets of animation that could be used to create key moments in our previs. Now, we wanted to share this little bit of film just to show you what the difference is between the previs and our final shots. So on the left hand side, these are the shots the way they started initially. So you can see in terms of shot design, we were in general quite close. So we managed to keep a lot of the style of the cameras between the first process and then the final film. The biggest difference you can see in terms of timing comes from the fact that in between the two we had a mocap shoot, and we actually worked with an actress in order to set up the movement. So everything on the left was usually a little bit lazier in terms of movement, felt a little bit slow motion, and then on the right hand side everything should feel a bit snappier and a little bit more realistic in terms of movement. But the shots were in principle very similar. We edited everything in Unreal. So from the beginning, as we were making the previs, you can see in the image that we already used Sequencer in order to put together entire sequences. So this allows us to get an idea of how long each of these beats would be, what would be the timing of each of the beats, and focusing on trying to create moments. Even if at this stage the animation was extremely rough, we're just trying to figure out what needs more time, what needs less time, how are we gonna manage to tell our story in the 5-minute window that was allowed for the film for the competition. So I have here a little moment from the edit.
Now it's your turn. But please be careful down there.
You can see that we had very rough assets. However, that allowed us to still do a first test where we put music, we test the cameras in order to create moments for the film. And obviously, a lot of the content ended up being quite different in the end. Now, why would editing in Unreal Engine be beneficial? I don't know how many of you are using Sequencer in this way, but we found it absolutely amazing in order to keep our iterative process and keep a fluid flow of data from previs all the way to final pixels. So one of the main things is the fact that we can do live editing. So in terms of the shot structure, we ended up changing things quite a lot on the fly. Then we used sub-levels quite a bit in order to work in the same environment, but load and unload different levels when it came to, you know, the earthquake that happens later in the film, all the effects elements, different beats in the story pretty much. Then we use shot overrides in order to create hero lighting per shot. So even if we had a generic light rig that was lighting the scene, a lot of it has been adjusted on a shot level. And again, this also allowed us to cheat the position of elements just to give us better composition in particular shots. So let's have a little look playing through a couple of our sequences. So as you can see, we were able to just scroll through the film. So this was really good because this would allow us to test our edit. We are not the most experienced people when it comes to cinematography and when it comes to editing. So the technique that we used was very much trial and error. So that meant that we were able to create our cameras, put the cameras in an edit, and just have a look playing the scene. This would mean that if we got it right, everything would just flow nicely. Whenever stuff would jump in the edit, that's when we went in and either adjusted the camera or adjusted a little bit the animation. So it's just a very powerful way of working, because normally when you're rendering QuickTimes and an editor puts the film together, they don't have control over what's happening within the image. And this is where, for us, everything was very different, because you could set up your shots and then dive into a shot, adjust the camera or adjust the lighting to allow it to flow better. We found that to be probably the number one factor that allowed us to deliver the film in a short amount of time. The next section of the presentation, we're going to be chatting about Cassini herself. So in order to create her, we had an amazing team of artists that jumped on the character from day one. We knew that this was probably going to be the biggest challenge, being able to deliver a fully rigged character in the short amount of time that we had, that was supposed to be done in terms of starting from the design phase all the way down to final animation and facial animation. So from the beginning, we tried to make our life easy by using the suit into our advantage and really focusing the details where we knew we're going to see them. We started with the scan just because it just allowed us to start very fast. From the previous stage, just how we used an asset for the suit, we used this asset for the face. So very, very early on, we placed the head inside the helmet and allowed us to ground us to reality. So starting from a scan, that just meant that, hey, this is the target, or this is the target and the starting point in a way, and was great to kind of go from there. Now, from that moment, a lot of time was spent into actually getting to the point where Cassini is in the final film. So Sam Jensen was the artist that worked on her. And as you can see in the scene, initially we worked a lot with side by side with where we were with the completely remodeled face and the scan on the right hand side, in order to see what features are we missing. And even in terms of skin detail, it was very, very useful to always compare, see if we lost anything. And that was key, I think, to starting the character. Obviously, the further away we went, it was more about Sam's artistry to deliver, because we went in and prepared Cassini for wherever the project is going to go next. So she's fully rigged now. In terms of designing the suit, we started with two ideas. One of them was that we wanted to be sci-fi, but we don't want her to look like a soldier. So we looked at more scientific, modern space exploration suits. And the second one was that we wanted it to be reminiscent of Arctic explorers. So the references from the beginning combine these two concepts: the science modern suit with the Arctic explorer suit. We went through a few design iterations in terms of the overall shape of her body in general, but also the armor that she would be having. Make sure that it looks very light. What would be the areas where we want to focus detail on, so on and so forth. And these were some early iterations. In order to get to where Cassini got, I think a lot of the effort was into simplifying the shapes and making sure that the suit looks clean and modern. A lot of the references for it were that same idea, the combination of films and modern science and not old, but artistic explorer gear. The little details, I think, made all the difference, where in terms of texturing and in terms of all the details understood, just to make it a little bit more worn and used, this is where we were inspired by some fantastic design in some other film projects. And now let's spend a little bit of time looking at Cassini. So this is where we ended up with the final shape of the suit. you can see that we put quite a lot of effort into having areas of visual interest everywhere on the suit, from the helmet that has the LED lights and the as it moves into the chest plate, and that allowing kind of the actor just some protection on that side, all the way down to the boots that were designed to be used to walk on ice. And everything pretty much was made with the shots in mind, because we had the previs from the beginning. We kind of knew what areas of the suit we're going to be seeing the most, so together with our artists we focused on those. So Victor was the main brain behind modeling the suit, while James was the one texturing it. So because the two collaborated on this allowed us again to kind of move very fast. So we used the first whipped versions of the model to pass over for texturing. That allowed us to do the first passes at color blocking, and once we had that, went through another design phase, going through and painting details and going back to modeling in order to introduce those details into the model. So this whole idea of an iterative process was all the way through our workflow from the beginning to end. A couple of the things to point out are maybe the stitching on the suit and the worn metal on the edges. These were all bits and bobs that we wanted to have in order to try to ground the image and add a little bit of that high frequency detail as the camera gets closer. The next phase was setting up a blueprint. So this is where we combined Cassini's model with the light rig that she was going to be carrying. Also, we added a few decals on the suit just to keep flexibility in terms of the light design and in terms of the placement of these tags that were designed a little bit later in the process. And here you can see Cassini in an early HDRI to get a bit of an idea of the values of the suit and how it would live in the world. We quite enjoy the red color on the suit. We felt like it just allowed her to pop in that dark environment, so it would blend in where it wouldn't be lit, but once light is hitting the suit, it would automatically attract attention. So we feel like that worked quite well. This is Cassini walking on ice with those spiky boots. This was fantastic for the asset guys to see as they were building the model. Another big character were the drones. So the fish drones have been quite complimented by people that saw the film. So this was quite a unique design, starting from a very simple shape, but trying to figure out a way for them to swim. And Jordan, who rigged both the suit and the drones, did an amazing job at this. So these are some tests just in Maya in terms of stress testing the rig and creating a few test animations. Then onto the environments. Let's first have a look at the frozen lake and just the base environment on the surface. So we built this as a combination of photogrammetry assets, also Megascan assets, and then hero work. So this is in Houdini, a pass at the ice surface. So we built everything in pieces just because we knew that we had to destroy it later in the film. So keeping that in mind from the beginning was crucial. Daniele did a fantastic job at this in terms of cutting the time in terms of generation of those pieces by using Houdini. Then we have some of our ice pieces that we built up using textures, and these larger chunks were mainly used for the larger aerial work. And these are the pieces in action. So as you know, the film was quite dark, quite atmospheric, and the whole idea was to only see detail where we want to add the detail. So wherever light hits it, we made sure that the ice has a little bit of those subsurface qualities that they absorb light. That really helped us focus the image. Then moving on to the underwater environment, this also had its own challenges. A lot of the pieces in the underwater environment had to be designed from scratch. So you can see here in Houdini the system that we used in order to generate the rocks, the sulfuric vents that are growing on the cliffs. The kelp was also generated using Houdini. So all of this gave our artist Daniele a lot of creative control. So once we were done with that, we came into Unreal, and we didn't actually sim the movement in Houdini because that would just be quite tricky to bake that animation. We decided to use world position offset to create the movement of the underwater movement of the kelp, and that was, in the end, that was a good solution because we had a lot of control over the background pieces, the foreground pieces, different areas could be animated differently. And as you can see, a lot was actually look dev'd outside in daylight before going into the underwater scene. And in here you can see us scrubbing through the edit, and on the left hand side you can have a glimpse of both the models and the lighting that we used underwater, while the right hand side shows the actual camera view, what we're actually focusing on. This was a very interesting environment to make. Even the lighting was a massive challenge for it, just because it had to feel like it's deep underwater and still have enough light to tell our story. One of the key elements was the flower. So this is one of the concepts that we're not really explaining in the film, but it's something that we want to develop definitely more as we go further with our story. The flower has been designed using, again, photogrammetry pieces. This is something that we quite believe in terms of design process, basing everything on something that is real. And we try to have it grounded somehow, but give it an alien shape. So it's a combination of coral, leaves, and the base of one of our flowers, with the noodles, as we call them, the core of the flower where the drones kind of go in. So everything was brought into Unreal, and we use similar techniques. One thing to note is that the noodles themselves, they are an alembic cache that has been done before. So we worked quite a bit on the look and the effects and just balancing out the elements in order to get to the final result. And we're very happy with how this scene turned out. Now, some of the other hero props. The sled that Cassini uses, this was something that Ben Sherman was very involved in terms of everything from design to modeling it to texturing it. So it was something that we really loved building because we wanted to have a bit of a retro aesthetic to it, so it doesn't feel like a very modern sled. We didn't want it to feel very polished sci-fi, but bring more of that Arctic explorer aesthetic. So we really focused on that. In terms of the canister, this is what the container for the drones, another great piece of work. We knew that we're going to get really close to this asset, so it had extra love and care. And just a little example of how tricky it is making a sci-fi film. This was just a light rod holding the light poles. Now, by this stage, we had everything pretty much designed. We had all the assets pretty much built. The next step was preparing for the actual shoot. So even if that we were furiously working on the previs, we knew that we're not going to have a film until we do the actual shoot. And for that, we needed the budget. For that, we had to find out if we are going to get accepted for the budget. So it was a bit of a tricky time before we started. And we used that time before the mocap shoot in order to really prepare. So these are examples of images in terms of how we describe the space to the team from Proxy that was going to be doing the mocap shoot. That had to be done remote just because we couldn't travel in Australia at the time, so we couldn't actually meet with the team. So preparation was really, really key to that. We obviously had to direct the performance remotely, so we had to rely a lot on the crew's experience. Here we have some behind the scenes footage, so this is going to be interesting to see. This is Helen, the actress that gave life to Cassini, dragging the prop sled. The guys at Proxy did a fantastic job in terms of preparing the props. So from actually building the sled that she's dragging along to the light rods that she has on her hips, as you can see, and the actual container itself. This is a beautiful scene that in the film is Cassini's moment with the drones just before she launches them. And this is Helen performing that scene. It was a really, really fun day as we did this. It was all done in a couple of days. One day with Helen doing the main performance, and one extra day where we did the stunts. So you can see that here. That's called the rib breaker, and that's the final stunt. And then this is preparing for that final stunt, the sliding on ice. So the team at Proxy was very creative in terms of how can we actually capture all of that. It was a really, really fun thing. Once the mocap shoot was finished, we focused on rigging and animation. So we knew that we're gonna have to process a little bit the mocap, and we were waiting for the final files. And in the meantime, Jordan was working really hard in order to give us a solution for that. So for the whole film, we knew we didn't really have time to kind of go in and tweak in terms of animation with Christian and Philip, everything. So we really had to pick our battles in terms of what we use mocap for and what we are gonna go into detail animation with. So as you can see here, we had a pretty good rig in Maya, very good rig in Maya, I could say. And all of these are just the baseline retarget solutions. So the Jordan, the rigging artist on the film, was fantastic in giving us a script that would take in the mocap data, take in our rig, and by just running the script, it would get retargeted and ready to go into Unreal. So this way, it was very easy for us, without the help of animation initially, to take all the data, drop it into Unreal, and update all our previs with the real asset and now with the real animation in order to be able to block in the cameras. And that's how we were able to tell the animators very specifically what to work on. So Phil and Christian really focused on the areas that needed their talent, while the simpler scenes where Cassini's just handling the sled or walking towards the sled, or we have the wide shots, those were really just the raw mocap. Now, FX was probably the biggest challenge, just because we probably underestimated how much work there was going to be. So even just looking overall at this image, we have everything from the laser that is drilling inside the ice, to the breaking of the ice, all the atmospheric elements, and even the school of drones as they dive down. That was a Niagara system. So let's go through that a little bit more in detail. These are our surface steam vents, very early tests, as you can see, because we still didn't have the suit asset. That's the temp asset. But again, in our first look dev scene where we were on the surface during daylight, then this is where we ended up with in our actual scene file. Some amazing close-up effects done by Tim in order to really sell the mood and kind of go close and see how that feels and how the story works. Then this is the sim in Houdini, and then that same sim exported as an ABC cache, brought into Unreal. This is a proxy version where we were just testing to see how we could play it, and honestly Unreal was amazing in order to do that. As you can see in these images, we have the geyser plates running, we have hail going, and FX sims. This was actually the final scene where we had everything going, like the FX smoke, the caches, the hail, the lighting, everything kind of running at the same time, and then the final fall of Cassini. Here the laser. This was another fantastic element done by Tim. The bubbles and just the drone release. That's a rig done by Tim. Just a lot of complex work. And here just a little glimpse at what the fish were doing. So this was really, really cool because it was built as a particle system. Tim had a lot of control and a lot of flexibility in terms of making this look realistic, and again, it's another moment that we're extremely happy with. Now, in terms of lighting, as you can see, there was definitely an aesthetic that we tried to follow overall. Like, this is where we reference some fantastic films like the Alien films and The Thing, in terms of getting that Arctic feel, and all these images are obviously from different bits of environments, but when you look at them gray shaded, you can definitely see the aesthetic and the color palette that was key for our film. One of the fun things to touch on before we go into just the surface setup and specifically the underwater setup is how we did the lens flares, because I think it's quite interesting that we use this old school techniques, that instead of actually having real lens flares, we decided to use stock footage and we mapped that on cards, and then those cards were parented to the camera. So it's very similar to how it would be done in visual effects these days. Like that would be probably done in a compositing software like Nuke, where you would have a card that is being filmed by the camera. In our case, we did exactly the same thing, but straight into Unreal, and that allowed us to really have those little cinematic moments that made all the difference. And let's dive in. This is a fun way of looking at it. So in the detailed view in Unreal, I'm in full screen here, just playing the scene, and you can see how the suit kind of really had all that rich detail on it when you look gray shaded, but also just the mood of everything and this aesthetic of the backlit image. One of the very important things for us was just exposure and just making sure that feels right, from the brightness of the skies that we had behind all the way to the exposure of the lights in the foreground. And you can see that the look is quite minimal, so we try to do it with a minimal amount of lights, but really focus your eye so that you do get that feeling of isolation that Cassini would have, that it's this dark place and it's just that little moment of light where she's set up that she's working in. This is the drill sequence where the lasers are cutting into the ice, and again, a simplified gray shaded version just shows you the exposure of the different lights. Now, as we move underwater, this was all about selling that image that we're underwater. So it's pretty it was pretty tricky because we experimented quite a lot with kind of how bright should this be, and how do we actually light the scene to make it feel deep underwater but actually give enough visibility so we can see what's going on in the frame. So the solution for that was a combination of top light. We had one direct light that was at very low intensity, giving everything a little bit of a wash from the top. Then we had warm lights at the bottom, showing, like here, kind of showing that there is volcanic activity at the bottom. And then we had these spotlights that had animated gobo maps in order to create that underwater aesthetic, as the whole idea was as the kelp moves, that affects the lighting in the scene. And it was all about tricks in terms of selling the underwater feel. Tim also did an amazing job for the underwater sequences in terms of the lens treatment, where we had very specific lens distortion towards the end, towards the edges of the frame, and how everything would actually be blurring. So you can see here the dynamic on the gobo was actually quite strong in some shots, and this is something that we really are directed from shot to shot in terms of how much are we using that extra gobo, just because we wanted it to feel underwater, but we didn't want it to feel too shallow. So it was a tricky balance. And this is Cassini in that little surreal moment when she's imagining she's underwater in the environment. And again, as you can see, exposure was probably the key factor in terms of really selling these environments that are really vast environments, but she's only experiencing that little bit where she's at and where the light is at. Everything was set up physically, so everything kind of fades into fog as it does here. So as we're close to wrapping, just wanted to summarize a little bit how the project went and what was fantastic about it and what we felt like we could really improve. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the remote collaboration process, I think, worked much better than any of us expected. For such a large team to be together and really make it work, it took a bit of an effort, and we had to find our rhythm. But I think that worked well in the end. Probably the Discord server was actually quite a key factor for that, in order to allow for collaboration. Then the fast iterative process was just the fact that we were in Unreal from the beginning to end, from previs to final pixels. That just allowed us to constantly improve and constantly change things without having massive repercussions in terms of time. So that's something that we felt was quite special and worked amazingly. And overall, the project just allowed us to build this base for future development. So all the concepts that we introduced, from the flowers to the kelp forest to Cassini and her drones, this is all work that we want to expand on in the future. However, in terms of how we can improve things, we definitely felt that on the character pipeline, we rushed things quite a bit. So Jordan was fantastic at giving us a solution in terms of retargeting quickly, so we can get the mocap animation straight into the character, straight into the shots, but we would have loved to probably spend a bit more time in animation, and specifically the facial animation. Then in terms of Unreal Engine collaboration, that's an area that we feel like we could do better. So not all the artists were working straight into Unreal, so some of the artists were delivering elements that were being imported and built in. So we think in the future, as we're going to continue working on the project, way more people are going to be joining the work in Unreal, just because I think everybody got excited seeing how fun it can be working in a real-time environment. And the last lesson is more of a storytelling one. We definitely packed quite a lot in the 5 minutes, and as we move forward, we want to focus way more kind of on the character and the story, because for this piece there was just so much to solve in terms of the prop design and the world design, that we really had a very small slice of what we think Cassini is and what Cassini's story is. So we're just very, very excited to work on that and see how we can make that better. That's kind of it. This was our journey of making Cassini Logs. It was absolutely fantastic, and for such a complex short film to be done in such a short amount of time, I can't imagine we could have done it any differently in terms of using traditional techniques. I think working in the real-time world was definitely the main factor that allowed us to finish the film. And yeah, we're very excited to win the competition and get the chance to push Cassini's story forward. If you have some questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. These are our websites, and would be happy to discuss the project more. And yeah, just drop us an email. It was really fun getting to share all of this with you guys, and thank you very much.